So, my man Earl, top Master Duel player extraordinaire, made a video talking about how Mulcharmy Fuwalos is more toxic than Droll Lock Bird. We're going to be talking, we're going to be debating all about that. I'm going to be debunking his claim. Let's go ahead and jump on in. Okay, first and foremost, in case you guys don't know who he is, this is my man Earl, all right? We like to say that we're twins, chat, because most of the time we agree on certain things. Like we agree on meta trends, we agree on certain cards being good, certain cards being bad. I think the big difference between me and him is that he is super duper competitive, where I have already put all my hides, my skins on the wall, and I just love Yu-Gi-Oh, right? But we still both dabble in the same thing. Just a little bit background about him. I know he is a multiple-time Masters player. I also want to point out that soon enough, he will be on the World Championship stage, and I will be rooting for him to win if he hasn't already. You know, I don't really keep up with that from time to time, but I think he will be a Masters Championship. If he follows the trajectory that I follow, he definitely is going to have his opportunities to take him. Now, whether he takes him or not, that's up to him. Let's hear what you have to say.
Like a very special video here today, right? So I'm here followed by
also
chat,
look
which
at
you can't see because
look at man's hairline, chat. Look at him. Look at chat. Look at his hairline. Hairline 2 out of 10, bro. I'm not talking right now, but I'm also wearing. I got something to protect my hairline.
Chinese invisible day, right? But anyway, so there's been this debate, right? Debate mostly started by me, but there's been this debate. In a scenario, right? We get the Fire Charmy, right?
Okay. He literally already nerfs Droll Lock Bird in this particular part, right? He says if we get a Fire Charmy, it's going to be something like Droll Lock Bird. I think if we do get a Charmy like Droll Lock Bird, it won't be preventing the player from drawing. It'll follow the same Mulcharmy line. It'll draw every time your opponent adds from deck to the hand, and then it'll be one graveyard to the hand or something like that. It'll be something of that manner, right? But
situation, right? So I am going second, and I resolve Fua or I resolve Droll, right? In which of these scenarios is more toxic for the opponent, right?
Okay.
Or if I'm the player going first, which is more toxic? My opponent resolving a Fua or my opponent resolving a Droll, right? And let's get straight into it, right? I feel like the biggest elephant in the room right here, right, is I do not think that cards that say your opponent does have board should also draw cards on top, right? I feel like it was the problem with Maxx C, right?
I don't think anybody has a problem with Droll Lock Bird when they are going first, right? When someone is going first and they get drolled, I don't think it's much as a problem as when someone completely establish a full board, right? That means they go through their entire combo. Then, as you are proceeding to attack and initiate into their board, they droll you, which makes your strategy so much weaker into approaching that situation. That is the biggest problem that players have with Droll Lock Bird. Same reason that they have with Maxx C. The suckiest thing about Maxx C is that it allows players to make a full board and then draw cards if the opponent wants to interact with that board, right? That's where it becomes really oppressive, right? Right? I think that's where people have the problem with these cards. That is like the hard problem with it. Now, don't get me wrong. There are people that don't like Droll Lock Bird and Mulcharmy Fuwalos, and we know why. You want to be able to do your combo, and you don't want your opponent having any type of advantage or preventing you from doing that. But, you know, jokes aside, the problem with Droll isn't necessarily that it prevents searching. The problem with Droll is that you get an opportunity to make a full board, and now if your opponent wants to interact with you, you prevent them from interacting.
Let's take, for example, like a Snake Eyes deck, right? I will say Snake Eyes, you know, like a bunch of times throughout this video, and the reason for that is because in Master Duel, when Fuwalos first came out, the deck that was in power was actually Snake Eyes, right? So, and it was used as like Fua was one of the cards that was keeping it in check, in like Konami terms, right? So yeah, a Snake Eyes deck, right?
Oh, he's about to make a dumb argument.
1 or 2 draws, right? To do an IP pass board, right? And then have some follow.
So his argument here is, if you get Fuwood, a Snake Eyes player has to make IP plus a monster on field, and they'd have to pass their turn. Now, keep in mind, I think that this is a flawed argument. I think anytime you start mentioning certain Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, that's where we start to get we start to lose track, because it's really about the cards in the game, not the cards in particular decks. If you one card combo, because that's what Snake Eyes does, it's a one card combo, right? And you get Fuwalos, you end on IP pass, you still have 4 other cards in hand. So your opponent starts with maybe 7 cards, and you start off with 5. Now, the problem with Snake Eyes isn't the fact of the boards that it made at the end. The problem with Snake Eyes is that it did its entire board, plus had 4 cards left over in hand to hand trap you to death. All right? Another problem that he doesn't, or he fails to realize, is adding more cards doesn't mean you win the game. The reason why Mulcharmy Fuwalos is a more fair card than Maxx C is because you can't use it when you already have a full established board, meaning that I can't reload my hand and go all out on my board, and my opponent just is in a helpless situation because I'm going to reload my board, plus they have to interact with my cards, meaning that we're playing the resource game and I'm so far ahead. It means that if you go first and you decide to dig deep into your deck, I am going to draw a lot of cards, but it doesn't mean that I win the game. It doesn't. It actually, drawing cards at certain points of times can be counterproductive. We know this. Players play bricks inside of their decks. Drawing multiple copies of certain cards is not a good thing. Then there is the, if you go over and wind up with a smaller board, where Mulcharmy has to sacrifice certain cards back into your deck. That's also a thing that does happen. He's acting as if Mulcharmy doesn't have fail-safes in it to prevent players from A, having the same advantage that players would have with Droll Lock Bird, having an established board and being able to get more cards or restrict the opponent, and B, that it doesn't punish a certain style of Yu-Gi-Oh deck. Mulcharmy doesn't say any special summons. It says 2 particular special summons, right? Come on now. Now, are there some decks that are unfairly treated by Mulcharmy? Yes, but that is more of a Konami problem. That is Konami making terrible Yu-Gi-Oh decks, then giving those Yu-Gi-Oh decks terrible support, then power creeping the game with making 1-card combos, and then making these cards to counter those cards, but also fuck over the rest of the cards. That is a Konami problem.
Snake Eyes would give 1 or 2 draws to end on an IP board.
Again, going back to this half board fallacy, a lot of these Yu-Gi-Oh strategies don't end on a half board through multiple hand traps. We know this, right? They end on a full board. And then your half board still has, hypothetically, even if they use like 2 or 3 hand traps, and I started off with 4 cards, you still have 5 cards. You still have your IP, your monster, plus 4 cards in hand with these 1-card combo decks.
Right? There's no way where you can just end on a board of like 3-4 disruptions, right? And then the opponent has like 11 cards in hand and you're somehow supposed to win them, you know? Then it just becomes an unfair advantage, right? However, Droll does not have that issue, right? So let's say you Droll a Ryzeal player, a deck that's like kind of like inherently like known to.
Again,
to
we're
get
getting into semantics.
Right? A Ryzeal player will a lot of the time always end on at least a detonator pass, right? They will also have the field spell, right? 2 pops, 1 negate, or 3 pops. We're gonna say 3 disruptions, right? Because you draw them, right? These 3 disruptions will have to contest 5 cards in hand, right? And that's not just a completely unwinnable game state.
He still fails to realize that he did these 3 disruptions with 1 card. I genuinely don't get him. I don't get him. He has 3 disruptions, 4 cards in hand, and the opponent has 5 cards in hand. He defeats his own purpose because he forgets about the cards that he has in hand. He forgets that he's talking about these 1-card combo decks that allow him to have 3-4 cards in hand plus 3 disruptions. Man, it's not working, man. You're not convincing me, man. You have 3 interruptions and 4 cards in hand. They have 5 cards in hand.
Droll actually enables gameplay, right? So we've seen time and time again, right? In metas where Droll was
the irony
right?
in his statement is wild.
That people can actually do certain like gameplay maneuvers to play around the Droll, right? In Pearly.
So basically, what he's gonna say here is that certain Yu-Gi-Oh strategies can play under Droll. Like how Pearly can activate spell cards in the draw phase to avoid being Droll Lock Bird, or how Brandon can do it and stuff like that. Again, we're going very, very specific, but I will admit, players building their deck to interact with Droll is a little bit easier than building your deck to interact with Fuwalos. You just have to pick a deck that Fuwalos can't beat. You know what I mean? If you're playing White Forest, there's no way to play around Droll, and thankfully, thank you. Burning out. But if you're playing certain Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, you have to accept that if your opponent Drolls you, you lose the game. There's like no ifs, ands, and buts, you lose. And that's not how Yu-Gi-Oh should be played. Fuwalos does not guarantee you lose the game. We haven't even attacked why Droll is not healthy, other than players being able to use it on a full board. To me, constructing archetypes around Droll seems like bad practice, because then it's more likely that Droll remains legal for the decks that do lose to it.
So Fuwa, your deck either has a good matchup into it.
So his complaint is that with Fuwalos, either your deck has a good matchup against it or it doesn't. And that is, I think that's valid. I think that is actually a concern, because Fuwalos is good where it's good. It's okay where it's okay, and it's terrible where it's terrible. But that goes more towards deck building decisions, you know what I mean? Playing Fuwalos in the main board comes with the risk of you go first, card's damn near useless, right? You go second, well, you gotta draw it, and your opponent has to play a card against it, right? Droll has certain similarities, but Droll is a little bit more malleable, right? You play around Droll, you do your best playing into Ash first. I think Ash is the worst hand trap to ever exist. I think Ash needs to be banned. That's a new pill take that I gotta get you guys onto, right? You can play around Fuwalos as it's active. Yo, you're right. You're actually right. You need to play around Droll based on guessing your opponent has it. You're right. So, like, and is that, like, at that point in time, I understand that there is a level of skill to it, but is that really skill? And the fact that these certain Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, like the Snake Eyes that he said, plays around Droll, that's not really, like, when you think about it, that's not really skill, that's knowledge. That's how, like, oh, okay, he probably has Droll, I have these cards, I'll just play the anti-Droll line. If you ask me from my perspective, it's numbers, right? So when I line up against my opponent and I open my top five, or my first 5 cards on my hand, the first thing I look for, does my hand play into Droll? Yes or no? Do I want to risk playing into Droll? Yes or no? Like, that's pretty much it. And maybe it's because I'm just so used to it. Playing into Droll, when you play certain decks, obviously I play rogue decks, so I always got to, like, do the extra math. When you're playing like a top tier deck, playing into cards like Droll and Lock Bird is like if you had a card that can go from automatic to manual. There's no real skill to just changing. Instead of talking about just certain Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, I'm going to use them all. My man Tamias has made a spreadsheet on which decks get hurt by Droll, which decks get hurt by Mulcharmy, and is it possible to make a board under it, and what are the ramifications, the benefits, and the drawbacks. Here we go. So chat, as you guys can see, this man has Subterror, Dark Magician, Fluunderies, Flower Cardian. Does it have lines under Droll? You can see almost a resounding no for a ton of Yu-Gi-Oh strategies, right? He literally has every single one, pretty much. Like, it's crazy. Right here, how many of these decks can definitely play under Droll, making a good board or full board, not sometimes or half board? 27%. How many decks can definitively play under around Fuwalos, making a good board? Good is relative on what the deck can do, but the board seems mid, and it's a mid deck, it's a good board. 39%. How many decks cannot play around Droll or Fuwalos and make a competent board? 39%. How many decks can play around Droll and Fuwalos? 23%. All right? The reason why the decks are oppressed only by Droll or only by Fuwalos do not add up to the number of oppressed decks by both at the same time is the same decks that play under Droll and Fuwalos and vice versa. His conclusions are, more decks among the popular archetypes, Rogue or Meta, hate Droll more than Fuwalos. More decks hate both Droll and Fuwalos in separate situations. It's hard to find a deck that doesn't care about Droll and Fuwalos. Right? Just raw statistics, guys. You guys can do what you want with that information. It's really powerful that he really went in there and put a whole bunch of Yu-Gi-Oh decks and then said which ones are which. Right? I love it. And it literally just proves that Fuwalos is not that bad. You have to make things make sense when it comes to competitive anything. Because players will use the most toxic cards to win. And Droll does exactly that.
There's no such thing as though I outplayed the Fuwa. That is a sentence that has never been said before, right? Never. I just made that up. That's never been said before. I chained a special summon to the Fuwa, so now my opponent gets like one there's Droll. Woohoo! Like
agree.
Agree. You know
agree. I can agree with him with that. Despite what he's saying, I think there's even less interaction with Mulcharmy Fuwalos. But I agree. I agree. There is more quote unquote. If we're basing skill, Dracotel does have anti-Mulcharmy lines the same way that Droll does, right? There are Yu-Gi-Oh strategies that do, but since Mulcharmy is new, I think Yu-Gi-Oh strategies have to keep up. You know what I mean? Like they have to catch up. So it's not like they don't have it. Actually, hold on, time out. He just said they had it. He said ending on a half board. That's the same type of skill that he was doing. That's the same type of skill. Analyzing your hand. Do I summon more times? How many times can I summon to get him what I give him? Right? We got a nice hand. We go minimal. We gotta know when to hold them and when to fold them, chat. Hold on, he just cooked himself. He's a phony, chat. You're a phony. You just cooked your own argument. You almost had me agreeing. That's skill too. That's the exact same skill. You're a phony. No, look at him. Look, he looked caught too. Look at him, chat. He looked caught. He almost had me going, chat. I like to hear people out when it comes to stuff like that and be like, yeah, no, we caught you. We caught you. I just said that wasn't no skill. So Mulcharmy isn't any skill. But if what you just said about Droll is skill, then Mulcharmy Fuwalos has skill. Let me break down why Droll is way more toxic than Mulcharmy Fuwalos. So this little gate is infamous for holding people out, okay? What we would do, you need to get into this gate. I would hide right here in this area. You rush through the gate. I have an ability that takes away all of your abilities, I think for 7 seconds at the time, or 6 seconds. It was a ridiculous amount of time. It turned all of you guys into Call of Duty. You guys are playing Call of Duty. We're playing Call of Duty, plus we have abilities, okay? How is that fair when your objective is not even right here? It's to get onto a particular spot for, I believe, like 30 seconds. You don't have abilities, I have abilities. They have to find a way to win without abilities. When there is a character or a hero or a particular thing that takes away gameplay, it doesn't raise the skill unless it's equally doing it for both players. But that's all we got, guys. Let me know what you think.